Greetings to our kings, queens, and everyone in between. Welcome to Melanin Muses.
Mindful knowledge, healing heart. We are your muses.
Cleo.
And Calliope, but you can call me Callie. We're here to give you a safe space to open your mind.
And to heal your heart while adding a dash of melanin flavor.
Disclaimer. We are not legal, mental, or health professionals. Although we're actively researching the topics we discuss and fact-checking our resources, please note that we are only giving our opinions and not professional advisory.
If you wish to get professional advice, please seek out the help of a certified professional or therapist. Let us begin.
Hi.
Hey.
I feel like it's been forever since I've seen your face.
Same here. I miss you.
I miss you too. Even though we've been chit-chatting. Obviously, you guys can't see her face or see my face, but we can see each other right now. And it's just, she's so pretty. You're so pretty.
Oh my goodness.
I adore you. Yeah, as a lovely opening, always start with love. And today, as we mentioned in our opening, our topic is actually primarily discussing this beautiful, lovely woman today, our dear Callie. She is actually undergoing something very, very amazing, and I truly admire that about her. She's studying her butt off to achieve her dreams, and it's such a fascinating topic. So I'm gonna let her tell you about what she's studying, what she's doing, and we're actually gonna talk about that and the struggles behind it and how that relates to like life and ish. You know what we do by now. So unless this is your first time, but you'll find out what we're about. Okay, anyway, go ahead.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Callie. You all know me as one of the Melanin Muses, and I'm currently in school for clinical mental health counseling. You probably picked up a little bit on that from some of our previous episodes where we discuss a lot about mental health and just wellness overall and emotional well-being. That's my thing. I love that stuff. I've always loved that stuff. And I've always been fascinated by other people's stories, their experiences that make them who they are and kind of influence their world perspective. So, with that said, I'm currently in school getting my master's degree in mental health counseling so that I can sit with people and help them to rationalize their life, their experiences, and optimize it so that they can be just better at being them. And as you all probably know, that's really hard to do in today's society. Most people aren't rewarded for being themselves. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. When we're told that we need to work for most of our lives and kind of put aside the things that we want so that we can maintain a living, you kind of get lost in translation, whether you come from a family that doesn't exactly give you all the love and support that you need, or you grew up in a system where you're judged by the color of your skin consistently. So, as a future counselor, my job is to provide a safe place where people can explore these feelings and experiences and make sense of them, and hopefully make new meaning for themselves and a stronger sense of self so that they can combat these constant pressures of everyday life. With that said, within mental health, there is always going to be a light side and a dark side. I am leaning more toward the positive psychology aspect, which basically promotes well being and a positive perspective on the world. It's very different from toxic positivity, where you're happy all the time, regardless of your circumstances. It's more so making meaning out of your circumstances and practicing that resilience that keeps you moving forward and learning from your experiences rather than letting them swallow you whole. So, when I talk about the darker side of mental health and psychology, being a counselor or a counselor in training means that you have to be able to see the person underneath all of their negative experiences. That goes for people who are murderers, who have a history of rape or abuse, who have been subjected to war crimes or even political crimes. And it can get pretty scary. Yeah, I'll just say that it can get pretty scary. What do you think about that, Cleo?
I feel like listening to you, like having like the idea of having to sit with people who have committed particular crimes, like people who've experienced it is one thing. Like that's what's the word? Um it's very mind blowing to be able to have to sit in another room with someone who's endured another, like all trauma is bad, but like different levels of like that extreme, especially like veterans who've been in wars or people who've suffered, like who witnessed like murders and things like that. That's another level of trauma to have experienced, and to be able to have to like sit with someone and talk through that. That's one thing. But to sit with the person on the other end who, let's say, like you said, the people who did commit these murders, the people who maybe tortured people, the people who are just in a different state of mind where correct me if I'm wrong, where they think what they did was right, they see no problem with it. The sociopathic people, to the point where they don't feel anything. They're like, yeah, I killed this person, it was fine, it was just a Tuesday, I was bored, this happened. I can't imagine the control, the amount of emotional control needed in order to not actively like uh show like any type of disgust, show any type of judgment on your face, because one, that puts you in danger if this other person's very unstable. But at the same time, it's like learning how to just like compartmentalize, like, okay, well, they're a person, psychologically they think this is okay, let's figure out why, instead of actually judging them. Because our first instinct, I think, as humans, we're kind of raised to kind of judge people, like especially when it comes to Hollywood and media and things like that. They tell us instantly, oh, this person gained weight, or this person's too skinny, or this person did this and this person did that. So like our instinct is almost like, oh my God, look at this person or what they did. It's like the pot calling the kettle black is our immediate instinct. So I can't imagine like having to go down, like making the choice to be in that position, to have to learn how to really have a strong hold on your emotions. Like, what has that been like for you to have to learn how to compartmentalize? Did it prove to be like a very challenging journey for you? Like, how do you think you'll be able to handle those situations? Have you been in those situations where you had to talk to people in those areas? Sorry, my language. Guys, I'm used to listening to more Korean than English nowadays, and it's been 3 years. So my language capacity right now is just failing. So my brain is trying to come out Korean. I'm like, no, English. So if you can't understand me sometimes, that is the reason. And if I'm pausing and mixing sentences, that is the reason. My brain is trying to translate things. It should not be translated. That's just a disclaimer. But anyway, it's so hard. Oh my gosh. But yes, like how do you do it? Like like first off, what inspired you and motivated you to like want to go down this path that's obviously going to be it's going to be a very difficult thing to, it requires a lot of self-analysis, it requires a lot of self understanding and self-control to be able to go down this path. To even for the positive psychology, you have to listen to people's struggles and traumas pretty much almost on the daily when you become like fully active in this career. Like, what made you want to go down this path, and what do you think can sustain you by like being able to and listen to all of this trauma and kind of like taking on other people's G, like, do you do that?
Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, it's not easy. Being kind of like a filter for other people's emotions. You take in what they give you, and then you filter out bits and pieces of it that they can use and apply to themselves to make sense of their situations. Because I saw a photo on Facebook not too long ago where it was a picture of a therapist in an office sitting in a chair speaking to one of their clients. And above the client's head is a rain cloud. and it's like dark and stormy and full of lightning and everything. And the cloud is actually pouring into a watering can, which is above the therapist's head. And the therapist is taking that watering can and pouring it back onto the to the client where a flower is blooming. So I like to think of therapy as basically a therapist helping people to bloom by taking the storms of their lives and watering them.
So poetic.
It's one of my favorite photos to represent kind of what I feel therapy is and how counselors kind of help people. But as far as how I'm able to rationalize hearing other people's experiences, um, if you're familiar, there's the humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers. And he described the most important feature of human interactions as unconditional positive regard, which is basically the basic acceptance and support of a person, regardless of what the person says or does. So, most behavioral analysts fundamentally agree that this is the basis of counseling and therapy, is that whenever a person steps into your office or sits in front of you, your perspective of them is always from that of unconditional positive regard. It's very different than unconditional love that most people are told family members have for you, or loved ones have for you, or parents have for you. In my opinion, unconditional love doesn't exist simply because there are always conditions to how people treat you and how people pretty much look at you. I think more or less, I would, at the risk of sounding controversial, I will say that I think dogs are the only source of unconditional love in this world. Dogs
Yes.
and dogs and small children, because they don't know
Ye-
any better.
We can't even say cats because cats can be
No,
assholes.
cats establish boundaries and demand consent immediately. Dogs and small children tend to see you within a positive light until you show them otherwise. And even then, it's very difficult to change their minds. Therapists, on the other hand, are obligated to see their clients under the view of unconditional positive regard, in that we accept you for who you are, we support you for who you are, regardless of what you've done and regardless of what you say. Because at the end of the day, you are a human being that is entitled to respect, that is entitled to care, and that is entitled to being heard. Now, obviously, there are parameters to this. If you prove yourself to be a danger to someone else or to yourself, then that's where the unconditional positive regard moves into us asserting that we can help you by helping yourself. And of course, obviously there are stipulations to all of that, but the basis of counseling is looking at people as people rather than I guess, narrowing someone down to the sum of their parts. I hope that makes sense.
No, that completely makes sense. Like logically, I understand how you would have to do that, like why you would have to do that. You have to kind of separate the person from their actions, especially if you never met them before. You're like, well, I don't know you, so I got to separate that. But you also have to keep in the back of your mind, like this person has the capacity to do X, Y, and Z, especially if you know their history.
Mm.
But like, do you think that there will be a side of psychology that you just refuse to touch? Like you will learn about it, but you don't want to go there, or you don't want to interact with that particular type of person that
Mm.
you're on. Do you have the capacity to draw that line within your studies and schooling, or do you have to go at least through some of that just to have an experience with different types of clients and then make a decision? Like, how does that work?
So that is the challenge of counseling, at least in my degree program. They want us to dabble in different areas of psychology just so we have a sense for what it's like to be there and to understand the population that exists in that realm. What my school tries to promote is that we're very well rounded, we're multiculturally conscious, we promote diversity, and we're also incredibly committed to helping anyone who seeks help. And you can't do that if you have these prejudices. Now, it's natural as a human being to develop prejudice against other people and biases because, you have your own story that has created a narrative for you and you've made meaning from those experiences and how you see the world. Counselors are no different, which is why going to school for counseling is so important. Not everyone can be a counselor, especially if you're entrenched in your biases and your prejudice against certain groups of people. I recall, oh my goodness, this is one of those weird situations in school where I recall we were having a discussion concerning um, privilege. And of course, this is a big hot topic or hot button issue right now in the country. It's always been an issue, but it's become much more prevalent in the last, I'll say, 5 years or so, with the string of police brutalities and the murder of Black people across the country. And with that said, that was a hot button issue within our classes when I was taking a multicultural and diversity course. It was there that I realized that many of my cohort members, not many, but a few, stood out like a sore thumb when it came to their ability to accept other people or practice unconditional positive regard because of their personal biases. And I'm happy that it happened there in that course because it was an opportunity for the rest of us to see what that looks like and also for them to see, to, I guess, measure their experiences compared to what's expected of our program. And just really quickly, basically, we were tasked with reading books from different countries. And one of the books that one of my classmates selected had to do with a young African girl who went through all these horrific experiences. I can't recall the book's title at this time, but we had to discuss these books in length and pretty much discuss pieces of the stories that we resonated with, pieces that we couldn't resonate with, and how we would regard this person if they were sitting in a chair right across from us. And unfortunately, the person who was speaking told our group that they couldn't relate to this young African girl because they had no way of understanding their experience. And they didn't find the book particularly interesting for that reason. They said it was a very hard read for them because they couldn't put themselves in that girl's shoes. They weren't able to enjoy the book. They weren't able to enjoy her story. And that shocked me because, as a Black woman, I've spent most of my life putting myself in the shoes of heroines and main characters of other cultures and races that are different than myself. And I've been able to do that just fine. In fact, I've resonated very deeply with characters that weren't even the same gender as I am. And I know it was a very difficult time for me to come to grips with someone not being that far removed and not being able to put themselves in someone else's shoes because they couldn't immediately relate to their experiences. But that's why I think it's important for people to walk in someone else's experience to some degree, because you get a sense, at least a taste of empathy in that perspective. So, yeah, I would say that it's important to dabble in different areas of psychology with different populations because you need to be well rounded and broad in your perspective and worldview in order to help most people you encounter. Now, if you can't, then you need to understand where that blockage is coming from and where those biases originated. But that's all part of being a counselor.
Did you find that, like, when you first started, if you don't mind sharing, like, briefly about it, like, not gonna dig too deep into that, but do you find that when you first started studying, did you notice that you yourself had a lot of biases when you first started? And like, what steps did you take to start undoing those biases, or like what steps do people in general who want to go down this route, who are studying this route, like what steps do you have to take to start to undo those biases once you start noticing them like coming up?
Yes. So I starting my program, I am a very type A personality. I am a perfectionist and have a very black and white perspective about how things should be done. In my opinion, or before, I've since changed my perspective on this, but before I was very hard on people that weren't able to power through difficult situations and achieve what's necessary. In my opinion, at the time, it was you didn't want it bad enough. If you did, nothing should be able to stop you from achieving your goals. It wasn't until I started therapy myself did I start to realize that that's a trauma response from being expected to perform consistently and being held to a very high standard a majority of my life. I have been taught that there's no such thing as an excuse in pursuit of excellence. I also didn't have the luxury of not being excellent. Um, when it came to being compared to either family members or other people in my community, classmates, I had to be the best in the room because there was always someone who had an advantage in one way or another, whether it was financially or status wise, even skin color. There was always someone who had a leg up, which means that I would have to try twice as hard to be on the same level. So if I'm going to try, I might as well be the best. And that means that the distance between us was untouchable. But I understand now, while speaking with my therapist, and understanding that that is just a projection on my part. Not everyone has that drive, not everyone has that ability. And frankly, it's not healthy to enforce that expectation on other people or even yourself for that matter. So it's taken me some time to kind of sit back and really just search within myself to understand where that came from and to start to put that to rest by giving myself the grace and permission to not be excellent all the time. Oh, it's so wonderful learning, growing.
No, like definitely it's very fascinating that you're saying like the whole type A personality thing, because I know I was around a lot of those people growing up. There's like a lot of type A personalities, but also especially in college. And it wasn't until I started my own mental health journey where I was just like, what's wrong with me? Of why can't I just get over it? Because I was struggling a lot through traumatic experiences I've been through, that I just didn't know how to process. And the instinct is to just like, you try so hard, but you never seem to get there. And then you see other people around you who are just pushing through and just like suck it up and get over it. And that's things that I was told as well, of just get over it. You're too soft. You're too emotional. You just got to suck it up and do it. Like even being told by like teachers or family or things like that, like, oh, you just got to suck it up and stop being too weak or emotional. You know what I mean? And it really dampened my mental health and emotional health of like wondering of, oh yeah, why can I just get over it? Why can I just do it and just like suck it up like they are saying? And it just made it like 10 times worse. So I totally get that aspect of, it's not necessarily always you as a person that is causing the issue. It's things that have happened to you that you just haven't either realize this and way you're able to move on and be able to progress through life in the more positive and healthier manner to get things done as you want them to be done. So it's fascinating how, or at least it's a relief almost. English, Nikki, English. It's like how you guys are, those studying the psychology route and the becoming a therapist and psychologist route, you guys have to actively be introspective and actively search through yourselves and actively make this effort because you have to do it for your job. So you have to go through it. But I feel like, do you think that they should implement more psychological assistance in schools, everyday schools, like especially for children, like teach kids how to be more introspective, how to become more emotionally aware, psychologically aware of themselves in order to have like a healthier mindset? Like, do you think that should actually be a class introduced into the school system? Like, how do you like feel about that? Like, because you're studying now, like, do you think more people should be required to even just study the basics of it in order to understand themselves more? Or like, what do you think about that?
The short answer, absolutely. But just as I believe that gym classes are necessary as far as the physical fitness aspect of our education is considered a necessity for an academic curriculum, I believe that mental health or mental awareness should be included and just as important, because there are a lot of children who grow up in situations where they don't know how to regulate their emotions. And not to say that it's anyone's fault, uh, but sometimes when you're not learning how to do it at home, or you don't have the academic staff with you that can model these behaviors, sometimes you need to be manually coached. And if there was a course that children could take that either taught them how to be mindful of their own bodies and their emotions that come with them, like how to manage their anger when they're faced with situations that frustrate them, or how to deal with bullying. Because in many cases, bullies are bullies because they're being bullied. So hurt people hurt people. Like that's the bottom line. So if we can teach children how to be, I guess, more in tune with their emotional selves, I feel like that would be a positive shift in how many of us are able to develop into fully functional adults who are realized in our emotional capacity and our emotional maturity in interacting not only with ourselves but just interacting with each other overall.
Oh, sorry, technological difficulties. I was trying to hit the button and it wouldn't hit. No, but no, yeah, I totally agree with you. I love the idea, well, like the quote that you mentioned of hurt people, because it's true. Um, and I remember reading a bunch of articles in terms of like different like routes. Like I know some jails have incorporated animal therapy
Oh,
into their system,
yes.
which I love that idea, as
Oh,
well as some schools I think implemented meditation and yoga for
lovely.
kids instead of detention, which I'm like,
Mhm.
I think that's amazing. Like, but I feel that when it comes to mental health, it's still like, even though like in recent years, things are starting to lighten up on it, it's becoming, people are talking about it a little bit more. I still
Mhm.
feel like there's a big stigma on it when you're like, oh yeah, I go to a therapist, and it's just like, oh, therapist, especially within our own community.
Oh
Like
goodness.
how, speaking of which,
Ooh.
in terms of our community, the Black community, like how is it in regards to like the numbers, the representation of not only Black people who are studying this to become therapists and psychologists, but also Black women in the field? Like, what are the numbers for that? If you know, like basic version, generic version, you know what I mean?
Yes. As far as Black female counselors, I know that there's an emerging community for it. Uh, it's a recognized need, particularly just making sure that people have access to it. Like there's a website called Therapy for Black Girls. There is www.blackfemaletherapist.com. They also have on Psychology Today in the therapist directory the best Black and African American therapists available. Um, it's becoming a need that's being recognized and addressed within the community. Because for a time, unfortunately, mental health was not something that was discussed openly. It was more something you discussed behind. You didn't even discuss it. You would just kind of brush it under the rug and say, "Okay, well, you'll get over it. Just stop it before I give you something to cry about." Like it's
Oh
kind of
my
like, or you better fix your face. Like it's kind of like there's something happening and it's not being addressed. And then you would have a church community where you might have a pastor that you could talk to for like spiritual counseling or professional, like marriage counseling within that realm. But there wasn't actual uh, encouragement to go to a therapist or a counselor to deal with issues. So I'm just happy to know that therapy is becoming more and more prevalent in the Black community, at least from my perspective. And I'm also incredibly happy to see within my cohort a lot of African American and Black um, therapists working beside me as we work together to emerge into the community and hopefully encourage other people, because also the African American and Black experience is different. um, Most people prefer to see a therapist that they can relate to, whether it's culturally or, ethnically. Um, there's just a certain level of understanding that comes there. Not to say that there's discrimination in that realm, but speaking to a white therapist is a very different experience than speaking to a black therapist. And I've learned this from experience. It's not that they don't mean well, and it's not that oops, sorry. It's not that they don't mean well, and it's not that they don't completely understand. It's just having someone who has lived your experiences speak with you about those same experiences in a way that you can understand and more or less feel comforted and safe in means the world. And that's just the way it is in many cases. Of course, there have been positive experiences with therapists of other ethnicities and cultural upbringing. But there are studies that show that most people would prefer to have a therapist within their same group to talk to, because it's just there's an instant connection that happens there. So I'm just happy to know that there are a lot more female black therapists and even black male therapists that are going into the field that can sit with them, because we need you. We do. This is a call to action to anybody out there who's studying now. Stay the path. Trust the process. And I know you're tired of hearing it because I am too. Trust the process. We're going to get there together, and we just need to stay the path because we are needed. We are needed.
100%. I totally agree with that. Like I totally, especially like even understand the whole wanting to identify with your therapist. Like I've had a white therapist, I've had black therapist, and the white woman that I had, she was my first therapist. She was a doll, loved her, artsy woman, amazing. She helped me through a lot. But after 2 years, and I started to worry about like questioning about my black identity and like coming into that's not something that she could have helped me with. So I had to transfer to another one who was a black woman in order to get more of an experience of someone who actually understood what I was going with. The other person could empathize, but she could not understand. But this one can actually empathize and understand where I'm coming from because she went through it as well. But
Mm-hmm.
you definitely made a lot of valid points. I'm happy to hear that things are changing, things are shifting. More people of color, women and men of color, are going into this field and helping others get through the trauma, go through the trials, and help them come out on the other end. It's amazing. That kind of closes out. Uh, do you have any final like words of advice for those who are currently on the same journey as you? Any like words of support or advice, or for actually considering going along the same path that you're going, who wants to go into the who want to go who wants to go into this field? Dear goodness. Advice for those who want to go, and don't you laugh at me, ma'am.
I'm laughing with you.
Lies. um any advice for those who want to go in this field? You know what I mean, but answer the question so we can close this out.
Well, yes. If you are looking to go into the field of as a professional counselor or a professional therapist, a psychologist, or anything within the umbrella of psychology, I would highly encourage it, especially if you consider yourself to be a very empathetic person, someone who is interested in other people's stories and wants to help enhance their lives in a way that's meaningful. I would encourage it. Now, I do want to let you know that it is a lot of emotional energy that you will be expending. And I would also recommend that you see a therapist yourself, either before, during, or after this entire process, because it, as Cleo mentioned, it is a lot of introspective work. You're going to learn a lot about yourself. You're going to learn a lot about the people around you, and you're going to learn a lot about the world and how unfair it can be. But the point in all that is you are a beacon of hope to people who are losing theirs. So, in order to be that beacon, you need to be able to pour from a full cup, which means protect your boundaries, protect your energy, and most of all, maintain an unconditional positive regard for the people who sit across from you.
Well said. Thank you so much for like sharing your story today. Like I learned new things, and I always learn new things when I talk to you, and it's amazing. So on that note, everyone, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Melanin Muses Podcast. And we will see you next time. This is Cleo.
And this is Callie.
Bye.
Bye.